All right, good morning. It's 8 a.m. We'll get started, and our plan is twofold. First of all, we're going to be taking a look at your DBQ that you guys completed. I've got them graded. I've got them returned to you. And so you should have received a message from me via Google that had your essay written. So I copied and pasted your essay into a Google document. And at the end of it, I pasted in a rubric for you to be able to look over to see how your grading went according to the College Board standards that were created. And what I want to be thinking about is at this point, we should be thinking, what are the things that we need to work on between now and May 15th? So we've got a month to work with in order to make sure that we're safe on the AP test and able to produce the type of work that the College Board is going to be wanting to see. So first things first, let me turn on the presentation right here. So you'll see the agenda for today on your daily coronavirus pacing sheet. You've got your Google Meet link right here that was sent out to you through Schoology as well. You've got your attendance form. Please make sure you fill that out. And then also stay aware of the fact that there are classes that are going on currently provided by the College Board that you really should be thinking about watching so that you're able to keep up on what content the College Board is wanting to farm out to you to get you ready for the AP test. What you'll notice is that what they're up to this week is they're doing period reviews. And so they will catch up to us next week. We're working on period 4. We did period 3 this past week. So you've got a chance to get another bite at the apple to listen to what the AP teachers are presenting and their perspectives on how to look at period 1, 2, and 3. Period 1 earlier this week, period 2 yesterday, period 3 today. And you can see how much of the stuff that you heard from me is resonated by them. But even more so, the reason why I'm watching these is I'm trying to get any insights that I can from the College Board as far as what will be showing up on the AP test, because I'm assuming that they wouldn't be releasing these things to the open public if there wasn't some sort of viewing by the College Board to make sure that the alignment was spot on. And perhaps they might be introducing some stuff skills-wise that could be helping you with your essay writing. So I'd encourage you to make some time to check these things out. They start at 10 a.m. our time, 11 a.m. On the East Coast. And so if you are free at 10 a.m. or else you'll notice that these are all recorded for you so you can double back them. You're looking next at the rubric that is used for the grading of your essay. And what you'll find is that on the essay that I've given to you, when you got it returned, you should find at the bottom of the page a scoring rubric that looks like this. And the scoring rubric should have scores underneath it, where I should have in each category a 0 or 1, 0 or 2, letting you know what score you earned. You'll also find a chart that looks like this, where for 5 of the documents you are expected to be able to handle the documents in a way that is effective, since it's only going to be a 5 document DBQ. This category is for just describing the document. If you just had a summary, this is actually using it well in support of your argument, and this is using happy effectively. Now, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be walking through the DBQ, and I'm going to be giving you some insights as far as what I was noticing. But if I come back to this document right here, I'm going to want you to click on this link. This is a student sample, one of your classmates, or perhaps even you. Student X wrote this essay, and I think that they did a very nice job handling the DBQ. And you'll notice that on the rubric, they ended up getting a 10 out of 10. This is going to be what we use to give you some insights as far as how to get better with your writing. And in particular, what I'd like to highlight is this, is if at this point you realize that your writing was shaky because your content knowledge wasn't good, you are not alone, and you have a month to fix that. And unlike other kids in the past who have had a month to fix it, you have got a month where you are going to be in quarantine. We are definitely quarantined until May 4th. And according to Governor Walz, he is very hesitant to say anything going beyond that point. But he suspects that the chances are slim that we will be returning to the classroom with one another. While that is sad in AP preparation, that gives you a lot of time to be able to fix problem areas that you might have. I want to also remind you of the John Irish study guide that I gave to you guys. This style guide explains to you how to do your writing. And I gave you a new version of this, and I forgot to link this morning. Sorry about that. John Irish Style Guide breaks apart what you should be doing with your writing. And the thing that I like about the one that he created this year is that this one has got examples of what you should be doing with your writing. And so if you scan through, there are tips in here as far as themes that you could be using, how to write a causation, compare, contrast, and continuity change over time essay. There's explanations for how to do an XABY thesis statement and what these things can look like, along with the level of specificity that each one should have. There's an element here that shows you how to do contextualization, and what he's highlighting for you is a technique that I've been encouraging to use as well, and I'll double back to it again when we do writing. But I believe that you should put a contextualization at the beginning of your essay, looking backwards. And like it says here, it may be like those TV shows that are episodic, where when you start a new episode, they'll start off by saying, last time on The Flash, and then they will cover all the things that had happened in the previous episode to get you caught up. And then they've got a post-contextualization at the end of really good essays, where you may want to have one looking forward. Keep in mind, though, contextualization must be connecting the topic of your essay to broader historical events. So I had a lot of kids in their writing who were writing things down like the American Revolution was a war, World War II was also a war. That's not a contextualization. You just figured out that things are similar, which is a skill, but it's not the collegiate skill that they're trying to work out. So they'll show you right here how to do pre-contextualization and thesis in the same paragraph. We will be coming back to this later on this week. Closing paragraph can have the same. But then if you're struggling with how to do documents in your essays, like perhaps you looked at the chart for your rubric and this chart's pretty empty over on the far right-hand side here, the John Irish Style Guide can help out quite a bit with that. It mentions down here that you should be playing it safe with your document usage to guarantee that you've got all the points that you need. And he highlights 363 is the minimums on the old rubric. So you should shoot for 464. 3 documents used in summary got you a point. 6 used to support your essay got you a second point. 3 documents that used hippo or happy got you another point. In your case, though, the rule that you should be thinking about is you need to use at least 2 documents in summary. That one should be a gimme anyways. These are the places where you should be thinking about your points. When it comes to using your documents well to support your essay, you can earn points for 2 or 4. You should use all 5. And the reason why I say that is because it gives you a margin of error of 1 in case you make a mistake on one of them. You need to use 2 documents with happy, which means you should do that at least for 3. I would encourage you to do it with every single one. And then it mentions down here, you need to use specific historical evidence beyond what is found in the document. And it says here you should use 2 examples. I would go for at least 3 in case one of yours doesn't earn points. And that's something that you and I will be able to conference about, because when we think about the essay writing that you did, you may end up with questions where you may look at your essay and go, man, I really thought I nailed that point. You and I should then be talking. After looking at the example, if you feel like you're still unclear about why you didn't earn a point, my job at this point is make sure that the rubric is clear and that you know exactly how to make things better. If you're not certain how to make your paragraphs look the way that they should, there's examples of that inside this writing as well. But then also they talk to you here about how to do your complexity point. If you're not certain how to earn that point, feel free to leaf through this section. And like I mentioned, we will be going back to this style guide coming up later on this week. But today is just meant to kind of give you the initial debrief about what you see going on here. So I'm going to want you, first of all, today to read through this essay. And when you read through this essay, what I want you to notice is that this essay is not perfect. And it doesn't need to be. So there's an understanding that there'll be minor errors. There'll be flow issues that are taking place. I do want to point out something to you, though. If you are tempted to use terminology that makes you sound 15, that is definitely the wrong impression that you want to be giving off. I remember when I first became a teacher, I came into the interviews wearing a suit, and I saw somebody show up in jeans, a t-shirt, and flip-flops. And amazingly, they didn't get hired, not because they weren't a good teacher, but they were giving off the wrong message at that moment when they were trying to impress somebody. You'll want to notice then that right here, using terms like wannabe, I get what you're talking about. A reader will get what you're talking about, but you are making yourself sound really not sophisticated. Go instead for academic terms in your writing. Keep in mind that you are writing to a different audience than you're normally texting to. But what I'd like you to notice is how this individual is using their documents. And if you read, you'll notice that there's going to be a combination of a summary and analytical connection that is taking place, and a use of happy or hippo throughout this entire essay. And in particular, what I want you to notice is that this student is in control of their essay. So this is a DBQ, a document-based question. Many kids in class, though, wrote what's called a document-driven essay, which means you wrote document 1 says this, then document 2 says this, then document 3 says this. And they're looking to see, can you take the documents and recognize there are some times when you need to shift the order of the documents, or there are some times when you need to group the documents. But if you group them, you need to treat each document on its own and then make connections between the documents. You'll notice that what's happening here with this writing, I have no idea whether or not this person stayed within their time limit. So if they did, it's amazing. If they did not, then they're going to need to whittle down when they get to that point. But when it comes to style and flow, this essay is right where it needs to be. And a month from now, I'm really excited if this is what gets submitted. If you are struggling with your writing, then this is where I would go to look at things over. I want to have this read for tonight. Come to class with any questions for tomorrow at 8 a.m. And we'll be able to discuss with you then how do we take your DBQ score and improve it. This week also, the College Board has promised that they're going to be releasing materials for us to be able to use to practice our DBQ writing. As I get those pieces of information, I will then be sharing them with you. These will also become our assessments. So I do plan on doing timed assessments coming up soon, where you'll be writing DBQs in a time limit with 5 documents, like you will on the AP test. And these will be going into your testing category. And so you'll want to make sure that if you're not good at this yet, you are getting that fixed. I've also got a solid 25% of the people in this class who did not do this DBQ. And so you're kind of flying blind right now, where you haven't received any sort of insight from me, and you're putting your grade in jeopardy. And I also need to contact your parents. And so if that's you, or you had this essay, you decided not to write it, my dilemma now is that you've seen what a good score looks like, which is definitely not going to work in an AP class. And so you need to get your work done on time. And if you are having struggles with getting stuff done, please make sure you work on getting that fixed. But like I mentioned, this will move from doing these as homework to assessments. Now that you guys have a chance to understand what's going on, but tomorrow we'll be able to answer any questions to make sure that you are solid and good. Also, if you are missing any old work, please make sure that that's something that you are working on during this time that we are away. And then I'd also like to review what we talked about yesterday. Remember these deadlines for when chapter notes are going to be due. So please make sure you submit those notes. And thank you to everybody who mentioned to me like Schoology issues or whatever. Remember, the way that you can turn these in is if you type them, you can submit them through Schoology. And if there's a problem with getting them submitted through Schoology, I can help out with that. If you are writing them on notebook paper, which is a great way to retain, then what will be happening is you will want to photograph that and then submit it via email to me. Madeline, I see your question. Would the assessment DBQ be curved? It would. I'm looking for more insights, and the College Board is doing a presentation coming up over the next couple nights for teachers to give us some more insights as far as what they're planning. I don't know if they're going to give us any more details, but I do plan on curving it. I'm also planning, though, that since it's going to be a DBQ where what we'll typically do is we'll do our review session. Today is period 4. When we get done with that review session, I'm assuming that if you're hanging with me and doing your review at home, the material that we've covered from period 1 through 4 should be totally testable in a summative sort of way. And so I wouldn't anticipate that the curve would be incredibly low, especially since the DBQ curve with their new rubric is set up to give away points, where in the past that you wouldn't even earn points. I would say that we want to be able to perform scoring the majority of the points on the DBQ rubric at this stage of the course. And I apologize for being a little bit coy right now. I'll be able to give you more numbers before you write one of these things, so you'll know exactly what you're shooting for. But especially thinking about that left-hand side of the column, you can assume that the curve if we take a look at our rubric that we have right here, sorry, there we go. I would assume that you should, at this point, if we use the left-hand side of the curve philosophy that we talked about in the past, your curve point 1, 2, these are meant to be givens on any sort of essay. You should be able to do this without any sort of problem summarizing the documents. And then this point over here is kind of where it gets into the sketchy area of support. But assuming that you can use 40% of the documents to support your essay seems reasonable. This outside piece of information piece has always been part of our rubric, so it should be an automatic. Using HIPAA or HAPI for your documents should also be, the complexity point should never be part of the expectation. It's one of those points where if you can get it, it's great. So if you notice what I just highlighted of things that were in our original expectations of doable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the other areas start getting into that negotiation area of how much should be expected. But that should give you an idea. It's not going to be flying in as like a 3 as an A. It's going to be more significant than that. And again, I don't want to expand any more on that until I get more detail from the College Board. And if I don't get details from them, then I'll just kind of feel around a little bit to find out what others are doing, and then I'll get back to you. But we're not doing an assessment this week. We'll be covering period 4 today, reviewing the civil rights movement in the Vietnam War later on this week, along with taking any questions about your DBQ tomorrow. Okay, so let's take a look at period 4. And if you could please take out your concept outline then. What I wanted to be focusing on is what we started off with. Sorry, what we wrapped up with yesterday, the idea that democracy has been changing during the 1800s when we were studying the time periods of Jefferson and also Jackson. And so when you think about the changes that we have with the populace who is voting, remember with Thomas Jefferson, he is a guy who is running for the Democratic Republicans. They favor farmers. They want to protect people during the Whiskey Rebellion. They are mad about the XYZ affair and the Alien and Sedition Acts. They write the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. They're afraid that the government is going to get too big and too powerful, and they're trying to look out for the little person, especially farmers in the South. Jackson, on the other hand, is of the mindset that both Democratic Republicans and Federalists of the old time are elitists, that they are people who are looking out for themselves. They are looking out for the East Coast. They're not looking out for people who moved out west into places like Tennessee. And Andrew Jackson is going to become the representative of what is going to be called the common man during this time period. And the common man is a proper noun term, in this case, to describe white, westward moving individuals who feel like the elites aren't listening to them and aren't respecting the fact that they are truly Americans too. And in fact, probably embody the American mentality more because of the fact that they are ruggedly individualistic. What we'll find then is during the time period of the Jackson presidency, we're going to want to understand this idea, evaluate, explain the causes and effects of continuing policy debates about the role of the federal government. This debate that we have right here is one that you should be able to riff on when you get into the test coming up in the spring. Your new political parties, the Democrats, led by Andrew Jackson. These guys are incredibly mad about what happened with the corrupt bargain of 1824, where John Quincy Adams, working with Henry Clay, was able to win an election where nobody won a majority of the electoral college. And so the Congress determined who won that election. Jackson ended up winning in 1828. And if you remember what he was up to, here are the things that should go into the margin of your essay. Andrew Jackson is somebody who is going to increase the power of the presidency. Many of the previous presidents were really torn up about the idea of what is constitutional, what is unconstitutional, and that is not what Andrew Jackson is torn up about. Andrew Jackson believes that he gets to determine what is constitutional. He does not agree with Marbury versus Madison. He believes that instead the president can make decisions, since he's elected, to make decisions about how the Constitution should be interpreted at that time. He is going to strengthen the presidency. So he is one of our strongest presidents ever. And his example is going to be followed by Abraham Lincoln, who is going to do some things that are controversial, but with the idea that in his role as president, he can do things to try to interpret how the Constitution should be going. You'll also notice that Teddy Roosevelt, if you notice Roosevelt's behavior when he announced there were good and bad trusts, Andrew Jackson is going to be the same, where he is going to say, even though Henry Clay and Alexander Hamilton are saying the Bank of the United States is okay, and even though the court case McCullough versus Maryland said that it was constitutional to have a bus, he is going to kill the Bank of the United States. He is also going to step in on a tariff controversy where he's not a super big fan of high tariffs, but when the state of South Carolina argues that they can nullify federal laws, he threatens to invade their state. And so he is going to argue that as president, it's his job to defend the Constitution and have it be put into place without having the states' rights to ignore federal laws. He is rejecting the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. As a Southern plantation owner, this is kind of an interesting position that he's taking. But when it comes to his behavior during the Tariff of Abominations, Lincoln will mimic that during the Civil War with Fort Sumter. You're going to see also that there are other presidents who are going to be picking up on that, most notably Eisenhower when he sends troops into Little Rock to desegregate their schools. Jackson doesn't like the idea of the American system, so he does not like the idea of building roads and canals. So states themselves are going to do that, and wealthier states are going to have an advantage over not so wealthy states. Northern states will have an advantage over southern states. They will advance faster than the southern states will, which will create sectionalism. We also have Native Americans who are going to be forced out west on the Trail of Tears in the court case Cherokee Nation versus the United States. You're going to have a court decision where John Marshall will argue that the Native Americans don't need to leave. And Jackson is going to overrule that decision and force Native Americans to move out west. As you look at the next segment of period 4, we do have a national culture that is emerging. And this national culture is starting with American elements that came from colonial times, new waves of immigrants who are coming into the country. They are bringing over social ideas from outside the country that are liberal in nature, especially reform. And they're also bringing over this idea of like transcendentalism, the idea that you can become perfect as a human being by exploring the universe through your mind. And you'll find that this is then manifesting itself in literature, art, philosophy, architecture. The names that you'll want to be able to mention, Henry David Thoreau is the guy for literature and philosophy who writes his book Civil Disobedience, which is arguing that it is your duty to stand up to unconstitutional, unethical laws. In his case, he was fighting against the Mexican-American War. His ideas will be taken by Gandhi in India when he is resisting British colonization, and Martin Luther King Jr., who is going to be taking his ideas as far as the protest movement for the civil rights movement that you guys studied over the past week. This is then helping to create the Second Great Awakening inside the United States. And says here, explain the causes of the Second Great Awakening. So notice the way that this question is asked. It's always going to have some sort of historical thinking skill, cause and effect, compare and contrast, continuity and change over time. So when we think about what's happening in the United States, the assertion is being made that we are becoming pretty individualistic during this time period, especially during the era of the common man. So if you wanted to make note of the fact that this was occurring at the same time as Jacksonian democracy, where you've got some people who are nervous about the rise of science. There are some people who are also feeling the disruptions that are being caused by change, especially with economic change. So if you've noticed that we have got what's going on right now, what some people would refer to as another Great Awakening, where we do have many people who are very much embracing religion because of the changes that they're experiencing in society. We see back then a Second Great Awakening take place, and this is with Protestants. So these are people who are not Catholic, but they are Christian. And remember that the impact that this has is heavier on the North than it is on the South. The Second Great Awakening, and if you want to highlight in this area right here, the big takeaway from the Second Great Awakening, this is going to end up tearing churches apart. And what we're going to find is with the churches, you're going to have a northern and southern divide that is taking place over the question of reform. And it says here, explain how and why reform movements developed. Part of the reform movement is going to be coming from this concept that you see here, that is almost identical to what you saw going on right here. There's a religious component to the age of reform that we have during this time period. There's a feeling that if you are truly religious, you should be working on reform. Now, some of these people created utopian societies. Some of them, like Brook Farm that you read about in your textbook, are like writers' communes where transcendentalists can get together and write about how they think the world should be. You also learned about the Shakers who believed that sexuality was evil because childbirth was painful. And you learned about the Oneida community who was making cookware. And they were also involved in complex marriages where everybody was married to everybody. Some people are going to respond to all of this change by withdrawing from the world and trying to find a place where they could then instead kind of explore different ways of living. There's going to be more people, though, who start forming these voluntary organizations to try to figure out ways to change behavior through either temperance or other reforms. So let me remind you of some names that can go over in the margin over here. Remember Dorothea Dix? She is somebody who is looking at prisons and mental institutions and arguing that they are inhumane and should be reformed and changed. Horace Mann, who is going to be reforming education during this time period to try to make education something that is more meaningful and beneficial. But he is also somebody who believes that the education system can serve as a melting pot, taking in kids who are immigrants and teaching them English and American values, Protestant Christianity, and so on, which is going to butt up against a lot of immigrants who feel like they're being indoctrinated and they're not really big fans of that. You have the Seneca Falls Convention that you should be able to mention here in 1848, where the women at Seneca Falls are going to rewrite the Declaration of Independence to reflect women and their grudges that they have against men for the discrimination that's been happening. But most importantly, we want to be able to notice what's going on with the abolitionist movement. And as you look down here, the big takeaway that I asked you to think about when we covered this is the idea that women during the time period, white middle-class women who are involved in the suffragette movement, they're going to merge together with the anti-slavery movement to try to figure out ways to gain equality for both simultaneously. Over in the margin here, the things that you should be thinking about are these. First of all, Seneca Falls is going to be incredibly important, but then also these two groups to show you the moderate and the more extreme versions of abolitionism. The American Colonization Society, created during Monroe's presidency, argued that we should take free African Americans and move them back to Africa. When that was largely fruitless, you had people creating a new group called the American Anti-Slavery Society. Remember William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and others, the Grimke sisters, who start pursuing abolitionism, and it's leading to anti-slavery movements in the North and massive crackdowns in the South. For women, white women who are caught in the cult of domesticity, this provides a lot of meaning for their lives. They can then get involved in movements, whether it's trying to root out alcohol abuse or child labor or problems that are happening inside of our institutions. Essentially, women are coming to the understanding that if they are seen as the morally good part of our country and they don't have the right to vote, they really have trouble effecting a lot of major change. With African Americans during this time period, we want to notice that there are CCOT question opportunities to ask about African Americans during the time period. So even though we've got, let me see here, Amelia, what's the second group called again? That's the American Anti-Slavery Society. We're going to find that for African Americans, they are not going to largely be able to effect change in the South. Remember that you have slaves who are engaged in slowdowns, that they are doing things to vandalize equipment. Sometimes they are embracing Christianity to create a resistance religion. You did learn about the slave rebellions, and the most important one is in 1831. At the same time that the American Anti-Slavery Society was coming on the scene, William Lloyd Garrison writes The Liberator. You have Nat Turner, who receives a message through prayer from God to kill all the white people he can find. And this slave rebellion frightens a lot of Southerners into creating even more strict slave codes. Remember that after the Haitian Revolution in the early 1800s, slave codes got worse. After Nat Turner in 1831, paranoia got even worse. And you do have African Americans who are going to start working in their communities to try to figure out ways to resist slavery, but the plantation owners are very much strategically thinking about how they keep their workforce in line. It mentions here, can you use geography and environment to explain what was going on with the South during this time period? A few highlights that I want to remind you of. The majority of white Southerners did not own any slaves. They aspired to, though. The majority of the plantations to the South were small plantations that had a couple slaves, a few slaves. The people who are in control, though, are the ones who are owning major plantations. And the same system you saw with the House of Burgesses in Virginia is in play here. If you've got a large plantation with slaves, you've then got the leisure time that you could devote to politics that a small farmer could not. They can't go travel to the central hub of the state for weeks or months or to the national capital. A plantation owner could do that. It's during this time period that you've got planters who are relying on the same system they've always used. The only thing that's new is the cotton gin put in 1790s, and that's allowing them to mass produce cotton. Your dilemma, though, is that when they start mass producing cotton, the price of cotton drops because the supply gets so high. And so as a result, Southern planters need to plant more cotton, which means that if you've got a small plantation, you're going out of business. Big planters will buy up small plantations. And then what will happen is slave owners start moving out west when their lands are becoming less profitable, or because in the inheritance system, they might not be in line to inherit the plantation from their parents. So they start moving further and further out west. And in particular, the place you should notice is Texas. Mexico opens up Texas with the argument that if you come in, you're going to give up slavery, you're going to become Catholic, you're going to learn to speak Spanish or become Mexican. And white Southerners reject all of that. They try to turn Texas into another version of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. So when we take a look at period 4 then, and we take a look at the causation element that we have going on during this time period, it says, explain the extent to which politics, economics, and foreign policy promoted the development of a national identity during this time period. America starts developing their modern democracy and a national culture. So we see nationalism rising a lot during this time period. And Americans were trying to figure out ways to make the democratic system that they had fit more with the experiences that they were living through. What we'll find then is that Northern and Southern interpretations of democracy and federalism are going to be different from one another. Southerners are becoming more and more concerned during this time period about the strength of the federal government. And you can see that with the killing of the Bank of the United States. We're going to find that more people start voting. So in our country, almost every adult white male was capable of voting during this time period, which is massively revolutionary compared to where democracy was heading around the world. Following the French Revolution, democracy was actually in decline in Europe because it was seen as radical and dangerous. We do end up with sectionalism, and you'll want to be able to describe what does that mean politically, socially, economically. And when we think about that economically, the South has not diversified. They're focused on cotton. Meanwhile, in the North, you want to, when doing this question right here, you'll want to be able to talk about the market, industrial, and transportation revolutions, which is transforming the North. The North is ending up with a diverse economy that does have industry, but keep in mind the vast majority of Americans in the North were still farmers. They were farming grain, though, not cotton. And what we're going to find is that this is going to then create divisions between the North and the South. You are more likely to find Whigs in the North embracing the idea of loose constructionism and more government involvement than you will in the South. And you are finding that there are many people in the United States who are looking to try to create reform because they have been told by Andrew Jackson that this is the era of the common man, where even a common person can affect great change if they are inspired. Transcendentalism is telling people that you can understand the truths of the universe, kind of like you learned about with people from the Enlightenment a few decades earlier. And the Second Great Awakening is encouraging people to find where there are problems. And they are arguing that that is where God is giving you evidence that work can be done to please him so that you can eventually work your way to heaven. And especially you want to notice for women and abolitionists why that is such a big deal. You can see them articulating each element of the transportation and market revolutions here. And you'll notice that this is helping to unify the nation in some ways, behind manifest destiny. We need more resources. We need more markets. We are expanding out westwards. But it's also creating tension because as we take over new territories, it is then causing a battle between North and South over whether or not those places will be slave or free. It's inside this window of time that you have the Missouri Compromise that shows you in 1820 during Monroe's presidency, the battle over slavery out west is tense. You've read about Texas. This happened during the Polk presidency. During the Jackson presidency, and you watched Andrew Jackson not want to touch Texas because he recognized adding the territory would be good economically. But once we start adding more people onto the South, that sectionalism will make Northerners mad and it could create division. When it comes to foreign trade and expanding our boundaries, America was trying to figure out how to become recognized as an international power. But following the War of 1812, notice that our mainland was not attacked in any meaningful sort of fashion following the War of 1812. And America is able to rely on its oceans to be able to focus internally. And while we're trying to trade with other countries, we're able to engage in manifest destiny, the rise of an industrial revolution, especially post-Civil War, with the rise of the Gilded Age. And as we start taking over territories, this gives us resources, but a battle over slavery that's going to carry us into period 5 and 6. For you guys then, with period 5, we will be getting this later on this week. I plan on getting to period 5 on Friday. Tomorrow, I'd like to debrief about what it is you read about from the 1960s. And in particular, I'd like to take a look at what was going on with the civil rights movement and also the Vietnam War. My plan also is the DBQ was really bogging me down. I plan on having you do more writing soon, but tomorrow I plan on doing a debrief. So I want you to, again, read through this example that you have right here, and then consider what your writing was doing. And what I'd like you to do is I don't want you to feel guilty or sad. This is all getting you up to speed, but also I don't want you to feel overconfident. We've only got a month, and so we don't have tons of time to wait. Now is the time to figure out what's going on. If you didn't score well, you should look over this and see what's happening here that you can get insights from. Secondarily, if you look this over and you're feeling depressed, sad, whatever, and you need me to talk you down, I would love to do that. Feel free to send me a message about when you want to Google Meet. I am on the hook at 10 a.m. to work with my regular U.S. history class. Otherwise, I am wide open. And this is typically the time of year that I have students who would do a flyby in my classroom. They'd sit down, they'd be like, I need to talk. And now is the moment where they realize that they've made mistakes or else things just aren't clicking the way that they want them to. And after a few minutes of conversation, we can make things a lot better. So if you want me to talk to you personally about what's going on with you and your writing, I would love to be able to do that. And in fact, that's one of the big things that I'm missing right now from our time apart from one another. Tomorrow, though, when you look down this, my hope is that you're seeing things happening here where you're like, yeah, I can see what this person is up to, and I can see why they were clicking the way that they were. You should emulate that. And tomorrow, what we'll be talking about is then taking a look at the John Iyer Style Guide, how you take his viewpoints and this style of writing and figure out ways to start accumulating more of these rubric points as part of your automatic default. And I'm trusting that for many of you guys, the writing that I saw from you with this essay is, number one, probably not your strongest because of the fact that you need to review that content more. This was kind of a shot across your bow to warn you, you may not have the content knowledge you need, but you can fix that. Secondarily, though, there's a bunch of you guys who are writing this hoping that you were on the right track underneath a time limit. And at this point now, all you need is feedback from me, letting you know that you're good. Finally, if you're somebody who didn't bother writing this essay, I'm not certain what that strategy was or why you would be choosing that approach, especially since you're not in school without athletics that could be distracting to you. You should be able to get this done. And so you should send me a message when you get this done and submitted. You will find that the grades are going to show up directly in Schoology, not on AP Classroom because of the fact that the AP Classroom rubric does not have this. But they are tossing around the idea of potentially incorporating one. So again, like I mentioned, I'm hoping to get more feedback from the College Board today that I can share out with you guys to give you more details about what's going on. But you'll just see a grade dividend driven in the grade book. This is our last of our formative grades that are happening right here. So by doing the essay, by getting feedback from me, you will be getting full credit for getting this done and submitted. And hopefully the information that I've given to you has been helpful. Stay healthy, stay safe today. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help you out. We will meet back, let me see here. We will meet back here tomorrow at 8 a.m. Amelia, I just saw your question about chapter 37. So chapter 37 notes were due yesterday. If you missed them, no worries. Feel free to use Schoology if you type them electronically, or photograph them and send them to me via email. My plan is today, now that the DBQs are done, is to power through a lot of the grading, especially old, late stuff that people might have turned in. So if you've been waiting anxiously for that, I'm planning on getting that done today. I also have to throw out one test for third quarter. And so you'll be seeing that reflected in your grades today. So you should be able to see your grades bump up if you're staying on top of your stuff. Have a great day. I miss seeing you guys. Hopefully things are good. And we'll talk tomorrow. Have a great day.